We are built on trust, integrity, and professional partnerships.
My name is Aaron Miller, and I learned the hard way that marriage is like working on a Boeing 747 with a busted engine. Everyone pretends everything's fine until you're nose-diving into the Pacific. The warning signs were there for months, but I was too busy being the good husband to notice my wife Lily was planning her escape route. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. It started with the phone. Lily used to leave it lying around like a piece of furniture, but suddenly it was glued to her palm like a surgical attachment. She'd smile at the screen in ways she hadn't smiled at me in years, typing messages with the intensity of a stock trader during a market crash. "Who's texting you so much?" I asked one evening, watching her fingers dance across the screen while our dinner grew cold. "Just work stuff," she said without looking up. "You know how crazy things get at the agency." Lily worked at Morrison Marketing, one of those sleek downtown firms where everyone wore expensive suits and talked about synergy like it was a religion. She'd been there 3 years, climbing the ladder with the determination of someone who'd rather die than be ordinary. I respected that about her, even if it meant I saw less of her than I saw my toolbox. I'm an aerospace mechanic, not glamorous, but steady work that pays well and keeps planes in the sky. While Lily networked at cocktail parties, I spent my days elbow deep in jet engines, making sure families made it home safely. Different worlds, but I thought we balanced each other out. That was before Brian Foster entered the picture. I first heard his name at one of Lily's company barbecues, where I stood around in my best shirt feeling like a wrench in a jewelry box. Brian was everything I wasn't. Tall, tan, with the kind of smile that probably cost more than my truck. He drove a cherry-red Mustang and wore cologne that announced his presence 3 rooms away. "Brian's our new creative director," Lily explained, her voice carrying a note I'd never heard before. "He's got such innovative ideas about brand positioning." I watched them talk, noting how Lily laughed at his jokes, really laughed, not the polite chuckle she gave my stories about hydraulic fluid mishaps. Brian had that gym rat build that came from having time and money to sculpt yourself into a magazine cover. His handshake was firm enough to crack walnuts, and he looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. "Aerospace, huh?" he said when Lily introduced us. "That must be interesting." The pause before interesting told me everything I needed to know about what Brian Foster thought of blue-collar work. But I smiled and nodded, because that's what good husbands do at company parties. They smile and nod and pretend not to notice when their wives start wearing perfume to work. Over the next few months, Brian's name crept into our conversations like water damage. Slow at first, then everywhere at once. Brian thought this. Brian suggested that. Brian had the most amazing idea for the Henderson account. I started to feel like a third wheel in my own marriage. The breaking point came when Lily's sister announced her engagement. Sarah was getting married in Hawaii, a destination wedding at some resort that probably cost more per night than I made in a week. As the dutiful brother-in-law, I started planning our trip, booking flights and accommodations with the enthusiasm of a man about to drain his savings account for family harmony. "This is going to be perfect," Lily said, watching me navigate the resort's website. "Sarah's going to love having us there." I booked everything. First-class flights because Lily hated being cramped, an ocean view suite because she loved sunrises, even a couple's massage package because the website made it sound romantic. The total made my credit card whimper, but seeing Lily excited about something we were doing together felt worth every penny. That was 3 weeks before departure. 3 weeks before I learned that some tickets to paradise are one-way only. The changes started small. Lily began working late more often, coming home with stories about emergency client meetings and strategy sessions that ran long. Her phone buzzed constantly, and she'd excuse herself to take calls that were apparently too sensitive for my ears. "Everything okay at work?" I asked one night, finding her on the balcony whispering into her phone. She jumped like I'd caught her stealing. Just Brian. We're working on this huge presentation for Monday. At 11 p.m.? You know how it is with creative types. Inspiration doesn't follow business hours. I didn't know how it was with creative types, but I was learning fast. Dave, my work buddy, and the closest thing I had to a best friend, noticed the change in me before I did. We were grabbing beers after a particularly brutal day wrestling with a turbine when he dropped the uncomfortable truth I'd been avoiding. You look like hell, Aaron. When's the last time you slept? I sleep fine. You sleep like a man waiting for bad news. Dave had a way of cutting through bullshit that made him either the best friend or worst enemy you could have. What's going on at home? I told him about the late nights, the secret phone calls, the way Lily seemed to be living in a different time zone than our marriage. Dave listened with the expression of someone who'd heard this story before and knew how it ended. You think she's cheating? The word hung between us like smoke from a funeral pyre. I'd been dancing around it for weeks, but hearing someone else say it made it real in a way that hurt. I don't know, maybe. She's just different. Different how? Like she's already gone, and I'm the only one who doesn't know it yet. Dave nodded slowly. You want my advice? Start paying attention. Really paying attention. Because if she's planning to leave, you better know about it before she does. I should have listened to him sooner. The final clue came from Heather, Lily's best friend, and the kind of woman who collected secrets like baseball cards. We ran into her at the grocery store, and she was practically vibrating with the effort of keeping something to herself. Aaron, how exciting about Hawaii. Lily must be so thrilled about the trip. Yeah, she's really looking forward to it. Heather's smile flickered. And Brian's going too, right? Such a coincidence that he had vacation time the same week. The world tilted sideways. Brian's going to Hawaii? Oh. Heather's face went white. Lily mentioned, maybe I misunderstood. But we both knew she hadn't misunderstood anything. That night, I waited until Lily was in the shower and did something I'd never done in 5 years of marriage. I looked through her phone. What I found there rewrote the story of our relationship in ways that made my stomach turn. Months of messages, plans within plans. Can't wait to be alone with you. This resort looks perfect for us. Aaron will never suspect anything. The Hawaii trip wasn't a family obligation she was tolerating. It was a romantic getaway she'd been planning with another man, using my money to fund their affair while I played the role of the oblivious husband. But the real knife twist came the night before our flight. I was packing, trying to maintain the fiction that we were still a couple taking a trip together, when Lily delivered the news with the casual cruelty of someone swatting a fly. Oh, I meant to tell you, there was a problem with your ticket confirmation. The airline says there's no record of your reservation. I looked up from my suitcase. What do you mean, no record? I don't know. Some computer glitch. And the resort says they're completely booked. There's literally no room for you. Her tone was dismissive, like she was explaining why we were out of milk. No apology, no concern, no suggestion that we postpone the trip. Just a shrug and a problem that was somehow my fault for not double-checking. That's strange, I said carefully. I have all the confirmation numbers right here. Well, something got mixed up. You know how these things go. But I knew exactly how these things went. After she fell asleep, I checked her email. The password was still our anniversary date, which felt like its own kind of irony. There, in her sent folder, was the real confirmation. 2 tickets to Paradise, Lily Miller and Brian Foster. Ocean View Suite, couples massage, champagne package. Everything I'd booked for us, transferred to them with the efficiency of a corporate merger. I sat there in the dark, looking at the evidence of my marriage's death certificate, and felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Not rage, not yet. Something more dangerous than rage. Clarity. I closed the laptop, walked to the bedroom where my wife lay sleeping peacefully, and smiled for the first time in months, because I'd just realized something important. If Lily wanted to play games with tickets and reservations, she was about to learn that two could play that game, and I was much better at planning than she thought. The next morning, I woke up a different man. Not angry, not hurt. Those emotions belonged to the Aaron who still believed in the fairy tale. The new Aaron was something else entirely, a ghost with a bank account and a very clear understanding of how the game was played. "I'm so sorry about the trip," Lily said over coffee, her performance worthy of an Oscar. "Maybe we can reschedule for next month?" "Don't worry about it," I replied, and meant it. "These things happen." She looked surprised by my calm reaction. "You're not upset?" "Why would I be upset? You should go, represent the family at Sarah's wedding. I'll hold down the fort here." The relief on her face was almost insulting. She'd been prepared for a fight, maybe even hoping for one to justify what she was about to do. Instead, I gave her permission with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Are you sure? I feel terrible leaving you behind." "I'm sure. Have a wonderful time." And I meant that too. I wanted her to have the most wonderful time possible, because it was going to be the last wonderful time she had for a very long while. After she left for the airport, Brian picked her up, of course, in that ridiculous red Mustang. I got to work. The first call was to my bank, where I transferred every penny from our joint accounts into a personal account Lily didn't know existed. 5 years of shared savings, gone in 30 seconds of electronic transactions. The second call was to my boss, Jim Crawford, a man who'd been in aerospace longer than I'd been alive and understood the value of loyalty. "I need some time off," I told him. "Family emergency." "How much time?" "Maybe 6 months, maybe longer." Jim was quiet for a moment. "This about Lily?" Word traveled fast in our industry, and Jim had eyes like a hawk. "Partly." "You need a reference for something?" "Maybe, if something comes up." "Aaron, you're one of the best mechanics I've ever worked with. If you need anything, and I mean anything, you call me." The third call was to Dave, who listened to my plan with the appreciation of a man who understood the art of precision engineering. "You're really going to disappear? Like smoke in a hurricane? What about your stuff? Your apartment?" "Storage unit, cash payment, fake name. Everything important fits in my truck." "And Lily?" "Lily's about to learn what happens when you try to fly a plane with no fuel in the tank." I spent the next 2 days erasing Aaron Miller from the world. Bank accounts closed, apartment lease terminated, utilities shut off, phone service canceled. I kept one thing, a prepaid cell phone that only Dave knew about. Everything else went into storage or into the back of my pickup truck. On the third day, I drove to the ferry terminal and dropped my old phone into the aquarium they kept in the waiting area. Watching it sink to the bottom felt like baptism in reverse. Instead of being born again, I was dying to be reborn later. Then I drove east, toward a new life that Lily would never see coming. Meanwhile, in Hawaii, my wife was living her best life. I know because Heather, bless her gossipy heart, couldn't resist posting updates on social media. There was Lily on the beach, glowing with happiness. Lily at the wedding, radiant in a dress I'd never seen. Lily and Brian at sunset dinners, looking like the cover of a travel magazine. The comments were everything I'd expected. "You two look so happy together." "Couple goals. Where's Aaron?" "Is this your new boyfriend? He's gorgeous." Heather played the role of helpful friend, explaining that I'd had to work and couldn't make the trip. Poor Aaron, always missing out on the fun stuff. The narrative was perfect. Lily, the social butterfly, Aaron, the workaholic who couldn't prioritize his marriage. But social media is a double-edged sword, and Lily was about to learn that lesson the hard way. By the time she returned from her Hawaiian honeymoon with Brian, the whispers had already started. Morrison Marketing was the kind of place where office romances were tolerated as long as they stayed discreet, Posting vacation photos with your married coworker while his wife was mysteriously absent wasn't discreet. It was advertising. Did you see Lily's Hawaii photos? Isn't she married to that mechanic guy? Who's the musclehead she's with? That's Brian Foster from Creative. Word is they've been hooking up for months. The gossip mill at Morrison Marketing ran on premium fuel, and Lily had just given it a full tank. By the time she walked back into the office, everyone knew she'd spent a week in paradise with Brian while her husband stayed home like a chump. But the real surprise was waiting for her at home. I wasn't there, of course. I was 3 states away, living in a motel and planning my comeback tour. But I'd left her a present, a single note on the kitchen counter, written in my careful engineer's handwriting. Enjoy paradise. I'm not coming back. A. That was it. No explanation, no accusation, no forwarding address. Just a ghost's goodbye and the slowly dawning realization that the man she'd been taking for granted had vanished into thin air. The panic started small. Lily called my old phone and got a disconnected number. She called my work and learned I'd quit without notice. She called my friends, all 2 of them, and got polite but unhelpful responses. Haven't seen Aaron in weeks. He mentioned taking some time to think. Maybe he went to visit family. But I didn't have family, and Lily knew it. I was an orphan who'd built his life around the woman who was now discovering what it felt like to be completely alone. The bank accounts were the next shock. 5 years of careful saving gone without a trace. The joint credit cards canceled. The apartment lease terminated with 30 days' notice. Even the utilities were scheduled for disconnection. Aaron Miller hadn't just left. He'd evaporated, taking their entire financial foundation with him. Lily tried to play the victim at first, telling anyone who'd listen about her husband's sudden breakdown. Poor Lily, abandoned by her unstable spouse. Poor Lily, left to pick up the pieces of their shattered life. But the Hawaii photos were still online, and the timeline didn't add up. You couldn't be a grieving wife and a honeymooning girlfriend at the same time, and social media had a long memory. The whispers at Morrison Marketing grew louder. Lily had always been ambitious, but now her colleagues saw her ambition for what it really was, a willingness to destroy anything that got in her way, including her own marriage. The respect she'd worked years to build crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. Brian didn't handle the scrutiny any better. He'd thought he was stealing another man's wife, but it turned out he'd just inherited another man's problems. Lily was suddenly needy in ways that made his skin crawl, calling him at all hours, showing up at his apartment uninvited, talking about their future together like it was a done deal. "I thought you said your husband was a pushover," he complained after a particularly clingy evening. "He is. Was. I don't know what's gotten into him. We'll figure it out. This whole thing is getting weird." But Lily couldn't figure it out, because she'd never really known me at all. She'd seen the surface, the quiet mechanic who fixed things and paid bills and never made waves. She'd never looked deep enough to see the man who could take apart a jet engine and put it back together blindfolded, who understood systems and sequences and the precise application of pressure to achieve maximum effect. She was about to get a masterclass in precision engineering, applied to human relationships. 3 months after Hawaii, I made my first move. A simple email to Morrison Marketing's HR department, sent from an anonymous account with a subject line that guaranteed attention: ethical violation report, employee misconduct. The email contained everything: screenshots of Lily's social media posts from Hawaii, photos of Brian's car in Lily's driveway at all hours, a detailed timeline of their affair, complete with expense reports showing company resources being used for personal travel. I didn't sign it, didn't make accusations I couldn't prove. I just presented the facts and let HR draw their own conclusions, because sometimes the most devastating weapon you can use against someone is the truth. Within a week, both Lily and Brian were called into separate meetings with HR. Nothing actionable, yet, but a formal warning about maintaining professional boundaries and the company's policy regarding workplace relationships. The message was clear. They were being watched. But that was just the opening move. I had 11 months left in my disappearing act, and I was just getting started. From my motel room 3 states away, I watched Lily's world begin to crack. Her social media posts became defensive, then desperate, then stopped altogether. Her friends started avoiding her calls. Her parents, when they learned about the affair through Heather's unstoppable gossip network, expressed their disappointment in terms that would have made a sailor blush. And through it all, Aaron Miller remained a ghost. Present in the destruction he'd left behind, but impossible to find, impossible to confront, impossible to explain away. Lily had wanted to erase me from her life. Instead, she'd discovered that some people, when properly motivated, can erase themselves so completely that they become more powerful as ghosts than they ever were as men. The countdown to my return had begun. 11 months after I vanished, I came back from to life with a vengeance and a business plan. The Aaron Miller who returned to town bore little resemblance to the man who'd left. Gone was the soft-spoken mechanic who fixed things quietly and never made waves. In his place stood someone leaner, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. A man who'd spent almost a year learning that revenge, like any precision instrument, required careful calibration. I'd used my time away wisely. The storage unit where I'd stashed my old life became a command center where I planned my return with the methodical precision of a military campaign. Every move was calculated, every outcome anticipated, every variable accounted for. The first variable was money. The savings I'd taken from our joint accounts had been seed capital for something bigger. Using contacts from my aerospace days and a recommendation from Jim Crawford, I'd landed a consulting contract with Peterson Dynamics, a rival aerospace firm that specialized in the kind of cutting-edge work that made Morrison Marketing's clients look like dinosaurs. "Aaron Miller," said Janet Peterson, the company's founder, when I walked into her office for what was supposed to be a routine interview. "Jim Crawford says you're the best mechanic he's ever worked with." "I prefer precision systems engineer," I replied, and she laughed. "I prefer results. Can you deliver them?" I could, and did. Within 6 months, I'd helped Peterson Dynamics land 3 major contracts that their competitors, including some of Morrison Marketing's biggest clients, had been chasing for years. My understanding of aerospace systems, combined with my newfound appreciation for corporate strategy, made me valuable in ways I'd never been as just a mechanic. By the time I was ready to return home, I wasn't just Aaron Miller, precision systems engineer. I was Aaron Miller, junior partner at Peterson Dynamics, with a salary that made my old paycheck look like lunch money and a reputation that opened doors I'd never even known existed. The physical transformation was just as dramatic. A year of focused workouts, better nutrition, and the kind of confidence that comes from rebuilding yourself from scratch had carved away the soft edges of married life. I looked like a man who'd been forged in fire and tempered in steel, which, in a way, I had been. But the most important change wasn't visible. The old Aaron had been reactive, passive, content to fix problems after they broke. The new Aaron was proactive, aggressive, and utterly committed to preventing problems by eliminating their sources. I'd become a different kind of engineer, one who specialized in human systems. My first day back in town, I drove past our old apartment building and felt nothing. The place where I'd discovered my wife's betrayal was just another address now, as relevant to my new life as yesterday's weather report. I'd moved beyond nostalgia into something colder and more useful, strategic thinking. My new apartment was downtown, in one of those glass towers that screamed success to anyone who cared about such things. Corner unit, city view, the kind of place where the old Aaron would have felt like an imposter. The new Aaron felt right at home. I'd been back exactly 1 week when I ran into Dave at our old bar. He was sitting at the same stool where I'd left him 11 months earlier, nursing a beer and looking like a man who'd seen a ghost. "Jesus Christ, Aaron, you look like a completely different person." "I am a completely different person." He studied my face, taking in the changes that went deeper than muscle and bone. You ready for this? Because once you start, there's no going back. There was no going back the moment she booked that ticket to Hawaii. Dave nodded slowly. What do you need? Information. What's happened since I left? The story he told was everything I'd hoped for and more. Lily's life had imploded in slow motion, each month bringing new humiliations and disappointments. The HR investigation at Morrison Marketing had expanded into a full ethics review after someone, Dave grinned when he said this, had sent additional evidence of policy violations. They didn't fire her, but she's basically radioactive now. No promotions, no big accounts, no respect from anyone who matters. And Brian? Same boat, different paddle. His wife found out about Hawaii and took him to the cleaners in divorce court. He's living in some studio apartment across town, driving a 10-year-old Honda because his ex got the Mustang. The mental image of Brian Foster, former creative director and muscle-bound home wrecker, reduced to a Honda Civic and a studio apartment, filled me with the kind of satisfaction that fine wine couldn't match. They still together? On and off. Mostly off, from what I hear. Turns out adultery loses its appeal when you're both broke and unemployed. But the best news was yet to come. Morrison Marketing had lost 3 major clients in the past 6 months, aerospace companies that had decided to take their business elsewhere after hearing rumors about the agency's internal issues. The company was hemorrhaging money and reputation in equal measure. Word is they're looking for new clients pretty desperately, Dave said. Might even be willing to work with their competitors' suppliers if the money was right. That was my cue. 2 days later, I walked into Morrison Marketing's offices, wearing a suit that cost more than I used to make in a month and carrying a briefcase full of contracts that could save their failing business. The receptionist didn't recognize me. Why would she? The last time I'd been here, I was just Lily's husband, invisible background noise at company parties. Aaron Miller from Peterson Dynamics, I told her. I have a meeting with your senior partners about potential collaboration opportunities. The conference room where they'd assembled to meet me was full of desperate faces trying to look confident. Morrison Marketing was dying, and everyone in that room knew it. They needed Peterson Dynamics more than oxygen, and I was their only lifeline. I let them pitch me for 20 minutes, watching them grovel for business they couldn't afford to lose. Then I opened my briefcase and spread out the contracts that would save their company, if they were willing to meet my terms. Peterson Dynamics is prepared to offer Morrison Marketing an exclusive partnership agreement, I began, worth approximately $2 million in billings over the next 18 months. The room went silent. $2 million was more than enough to pull Morrison Marketing back from the brink of bankruptcy. However, I continued, this partnership requires certain personnel changes to ensure optimal collaboration. I slid a sheet of paper across the table. On it were 2 names, Lily Miller and Brian Foster. These employees represent potential conflicts of interest that could compromise our working relationship. Their removal from any accounts related to Peterson Dynamics would be a condition of our partnership. The senior partners exchanged glances. They knew exactly who Lily and Brian were. The scandal had been office gossip for months. They also knew that $2 million in billings was worth more than 2 problem employees who'd already damaged the company's reputation. That seems reasonable, said the managing partner, trying not to sound too eager. When would you need this partnership to begin? Immediately. I'll need confirmation of the personnel changes by end of business today. I stood up, shook hands with people who had no idea they'd just been played by a master, and walked out of the building with the satisfaction of a job well done. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, both Lily and Brian had been removed from all aerospace accounts and reassigned to the kind of small local clients that barely paid enough to cover their salaries. It wasn't firing, that would have been too quick, too merciful. It was something worse, professional exile, a slow death by irrelevance. But I wasn't done. The partnership with Morrison Marketing was just the opening move in a game that was about to get much more interesting. That evening, I attended the Aerospace Industry Gala, the annual networking event where everyone who mattered in our business came to see and be seen. In the old days, I would have been home watching TV while Lily worked the room in a dress I couldn't afford. Now I was the one working the room, and Lily was nowhere to be seen. I was talking to Janet Peterson about expansion opportunities when I spotted them across the room, Lily and Brian looking like crash survivors at a victory party. They'd managed to get tickets somehow, probably hoping to network their way out of the hole they'd dug for themselves. Lily saw me first. For a moment, she looked like she'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, she had. The man standing across the room bore little resemblance to the husband she'd betrayed and abandoned. This man wore confidence like armor and success like a crown. She started walking toward me, Brian trailing behind like a reluctant bodyguard. I could see the calculation in her eyes, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, she could charm her way back into the life she'd thrown away. "Aaron?" Her voice was uncertain, like she wasn't sure I was real. "My God, you look different." "Hello, Lily. Brian." I nodded to them both with the polite indifference I'd show to strangers at a bus stop. "Where have you been? I've been worried sick. You just disappeared without a word." The lies came so easily to her that I almost admired the skill. Worried sick about the husband she'd betrayed? The husband whose savings she'd spent on another man? The performance was Oscar-worthy. "I've been working," I said simply. "Rebuilding. Moving forward. We need to talk. There are things you don't understand, things I need to explain." "Actually," I interrupted, "there's something I need to announce." I walked to the small stage where the evening speakers had been presenting, leaving Lily and Brian standing in the middle of the room like actors who'd forgotten their lines. The microphone was still active from the previous speaker, so I tapped it gently to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment." The room quieted, 200 faces turning toward me with polite curiosity. "My name is Aaron Miller, and I'm a junior partner at Peterson Dynamics. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Morrison Marketing for their partnership and professionalism in our recent collaboration." I found Lily in the crowd, her face pale with growing dread. "Special thanks to their senior management team for recognizing that some business relationships require personal sacrifices to maintain professional integrity. It takes real wisdom to know when to let go of the past and embrace new opportunities." The applause was polite but confused. Most people didn't understand what I was talking about, but they could sense undercurrents they couldn't quite identify. In closing, I'd like to say that sometimes the best thing that can happen to a man is learning who he can really trust. Thank you all for your time, and enjoy the rest of your evening. I stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward the exit, not looking back at the woman who'd destroyed my old life and inadvertently created my new one. Behind me, I could hear the whispers starting. Wasn't that Lily's husband? The one who disappeared? Did he just thank Morrison Marketing for firing his own wife? What was that about personal sacrifices? By morning, the story would be all over the industry grapevine. Aaron Miller's dramatic return, his mysterious transformation, and his very public thank you to the company that had just sidelined his cheating wife. But that was just the beginning. I had 11 months of planning to unleash, and Lily and Brian were about to discover that revenge, like precision engineering, was all about applying exactly the right amount of pressure in exactly the right places. The ghost was back, and he was just getting started. The morning after the gala, I woke up in my glass tower apartment feeling like a conductor preparing for the symphony's crescendo. The first movement, my dramatic return and professional triumph, had set the stage beautifully. Now it was time for the real music to begin. My phone was buzzing with messages from colleagues who'd witnessed the previous night's performance. Word traveled fast in our industry, and everyone wanted to understand what they'd seen. Aaron Miller, the quiet mechanic who'd disappeared in disgrace, had returned as a successful executive who'd just publicly humiliated his cheating wife and her lover. The narrative was writing itself, and I was happy to let it. But the most interesting message came from an unexpected source. Heather, Lily's gossipy best friend and unwitting accomplice in my wife's downfall. "Aaron, we need to talk. Coffee, please?" I almost deleted it, then reconsidered. Heather had information I could use, and she was clearly feeling guilty about her role in the Hawaii debacle. Guilt made people talkative, and talkative people were useful. We met at a downtown cafe where the coffee cost more than most people's lunch. Heather looked like she hadn't slept in weeks, her usual polished appearance replaced by the haggard look of someone carrying too many secrets. "You look amazing," she said, studying my transformation with the intensity of an art critic. "I mean, completely different. What happened to you?" "I grew up," I replied, stirring sugar into coffee I didn't need sweetened. "Amazing how much a person can change when they're properly motivated." "About Hawaii?" she began, then stopped, clearly struggling with words that had been rehearsed but felt inadequate. "What about Hawaii?" "I'm the one who told you about Brian going. I didn't mean to. I thought you knew." The lie was transparent, but I let it hang in the air between us. Heather had known exactly what she was doing when she dropped that bomb in the grocery store. She'd wanted to see the drama unfold, never imagining it would lead to this. "You did me a favor," I said finally. "If you hadn't told me, I might have wasted more years on a marriage that was already over." Relief flooded her face. "So you're not angry?" "Why would I be angry? You helped me see the truth." "Lily's been asking about you. She wants to know where you've been, what you're doing, if you're seeing anyone." "And what do you tell her?" "Nothing. Because I don't know anything." Heather leaned forward, curiosity overcoming her guilt. "Where did you go, Aaron?" "You just vanished." "I went to find myself. Turns out I was more interesting than I thought." I left her with that cryptic non-answer and walked back to my office, where the second phase of my plan was waiting to be implemented. The beauty of working in aerospace was the interconnected nature of the industry. Everyone knew everyone, and information flowed through professional networks like electricity through copper wire. A few carefully placed phone calls, a handful of strategic conversations, and suddenly everyone knew that Aaron Miller had not only returned from his mysterious absence, but had done so as a rising star at Peterson Dynamics. More importantly, everyone knew that his cheating wife and her lover were now professionally radioactive. The first domino fell on Wednesday, when Brian's largest remaining client, a small aviation parts manufacturer, decided to take their business elsewhere. They'd heard rumors about instability at Morrison Marketing and didn't want to risk their account on someone with personal issues. The second domino fell on Friday, when Lily's biggest account, a regional airline, expressed concerns about their marketing team's focus and professionalism. They didn't cancel the contract, but they did request a different account manager. By the following week, both Lily and Brian were handling nothing but small, local accounts that barely justified their salaries. They'd become professional pariahs in their own office, whispered about in hallways, and avoided at company meetings. But I wasn't satisfied with professional destruction alone. That was too clean, too impersonal. I wanted them to feel the same helplessness I'd felt when I discovered their betrayal. I wanted them to understand what it was like to have your world dismantled by someone you'd underestimated. That's when I decided to get creative. Brian's weakness was his vanity. Even broke and professionally humiliated, he still drove to the gym every morning at 6 a.m., still spent an hour sculpting the muscles that had helped him steal another man's wife. The gym was his sanctuary, the one place where he could still feel like the alpha male he'd always believed himself to be. I joined his gym. Not to confront him. That would have been crude and obvious. Instead, I simply existed in his space, a constant reminder of the consequences of his actions. Every morning, Brian would walk in expecting his usual routine of admiration and ego stroking, only to find Aaron Miller, the husband he'd wronged, calmly working out nearby. I'd transformed myself physically during my year away, and the contrast between us was stark. Where Brian was all show muscles and spray tan, I'd developed the kind of lean, functional strength that came from hard work and discipline. Where he grunted and posed for the mirrors, I moved with quiet efficiency, focused on results rather than performance. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. Brian's workouts became tense, distracted affairs. He'd glance over constantly, trying to gauge my intentions, waiting for a confrontation that never came. I treated him with polite indifference, the way you'd acknowledge a stranger you'd seen around but never bothered to meet. It was driving him insane. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, at the gym's annual membership appreciation event. It was one of those networking mixers where local professionals came to see and be seen, the kind of event where Brian used to hold court like a king among peasants. This time, he was just another face in the crowd, while I found myself surrounded by people who wanted to hear about Peterson Dynamics' latest contracts and my insights into aerospace trends. The reversal of fortune was so complete, it felt almost scripted. "Aaron Miller, right?" said a woman I didn't recognize. "I heard you just landed the Henderson Aviation account. That's huge." "Team effort," I replied modestly, aware that Brian was standing close enough to hear every word. "Peterson Dynamics has some incredible people. Didn't you used to be married to that woman from Morrison Marketing? Lily something?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. This was the moment I'd been building toward, the opportunity to publicly reframe the narrative of my marriage's end. Used to be, yes. Sometimes you have to lose something to realize it wasn't worth keeping. The laughter that followed was polite, but pointed. Everyone in our professional circle knew the story by now. The cheating wife, the Hawaiian affair, the husband who'd disappeared and returned stronger. My comment wasn't cruel, just honest in a way that made Brian's face flush red with embarrassment. That's when he made his mistake. "Hey, Aaron," Brian called out, his voice carrying the forced confidence of a man trying to reclaim territory he'd already lost. "Good to see you back in town. I was wondering when we'd finally get a chance to talk." The room went quiet. Everyone could sense the tension, the undercurrents of a drama they'd only heard about secondhand. This was the confrontation they'd all been waiting for, the wronged husband facing the man who'd stolen his wife. I turned to face Brian with the calm expression of someone who'd been expecting this moment for months. "Talk about what?" "You know, everything that happened. I think there might be some misunderstandings we should clear up." "What misunderstandings?" Brian glanced around the room, suddenly aware that he'd initiated a public confrontation without thinking through the consequences. "Maybe we should do this somewhere private." "I don't have any secrets," I said, my voice carrying just enough to reach the interested ears around us. "Do you?" The question was a trap, and Brian was smart enough to recognize it. If he insisted on privacy, he'd look guilty. If he continued the conversation publicly, he'd have to defend the indefensible in front of people who could destroy what was left of his career. "Look, man, I just think—" "You think what? That I should be angry about Hawaii? That I should blame you for showing me who my wife really was?" Brian's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He'd expected anger, accusations, maybe even violence. Instead, he was getting gratitude delivered with surgical precision in front of an audience that was hanging on every word. "Actually," I continued, "I should thank you. If you hadn't helped Lily plan that trip, I might have wasted more years on a marriage that was already over. You did me a favor." The crowd was eating it up. Here was Aaron Miller, the wronged husband, taking the high road with such grace that he made his wife's lover look petty and desperate by comparison. Brian tried one more time. "That's not—" I mean, it wasn't like that. Wasn't like what? Two people planning a romantic getaway to Hawaii while one of them was married to someone else? Because I have the email confirmations that say otherwise. That was the killing blow. The mention of evidence delivered casually in front of 24 witnesses transformed speculation into confirmed fact. Brian had been caught red-handed, and everyone in the room now knew it. He left the event 10 minutes later, his face burning with shame and rage. But I stayed, accepting congratulations from people who admired my maturity and class in handling such a difficult situation. The story would be all over town by morning. Aaron Miller had publicly confronted his wife's lover and emerged victorious without raising his voice or throwing a punch. He'd used words like a surgeon uses a scalpel, precise and devastating. But the best part was yet to come. As I was leaving the gym, I ran into the facility manager, a guy named Pete, who'd been watching the drama unfold with professional interest. "Hell of a thing what happened in there," he said. "Just clearing the air." "Yeah, well, that Foster guy's been nothing but trouble since he joined. Always hogging equipment, hitting on female members, making people uncomfortable. Tonight was the last straw." I raised an eyebrow. "Last straw?" "We're revoking his membership. Can't have members starting confrontations at company events. Bad for business." So Brian had not only humiliated himself publicly, but had also lost his gym membership in the process. His sanctuary, the one place where he could still feel like the man he used to be, was now off limits. It was a beautiful piece of collateral damage, and I hadn't even planned it. As I drove home that night, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. The second movement of my revenge symphony was complete, and the harmony was everything I'd hoped for. Brian was professionally destroyed, publicly humiliated, and personally isolated. But Lily was still out there, and she was about to discover that her husband's transformation was far from complete. The final movement was going to be a masterpiece. 3 months after the gym incident, I was ready for the finale. Brian had been effectively neutralized, fired from Morrison Marketing after his gym confrontation made the rounds of industry gossip, reduced to freelance work that barely paid his rent, and increasingly desperate in ways that made him dangerous. But Lily was still standing, still fighting, still believing she could somehow salvage her life from the wreckage of her choices. That was about to change. The opportunity came in the form of Morrison Marketing's annual Client Appreciation Gala, a last-ditch effort by the failing agency to convince their remaining clients that they were still worth the money. Lily had been assigned to help organize the event, a humiliating demotion from her former role as account executive, but the company was too broke to hire outside help. I received my invitation not as Lily's husband, but as a representative of Peterson Dynamics, one of the few successful companies still willing to work with Morrison Marketing. The irony was perfect. Lily would have to smile and play hostess to the man whose life she'd tried to destroy. But I had a better idea than just showing up and making her uncomfortable. I was going to give her exactly what she'd always wanted, a chance to be the center of attention at a major industry event. She just wasn't going to like the kind of attention she received. The week before the gala, I made a series of phone calls to contacts throughout the aerospace industry, not to spread gossip. That would have been unprofessional. Instead, I simply mentioned that the Morrison Marketing event might be interesting, and that they wouldn't want to miss it. Word traveled fast in our tight-knit community, and by the night of the gala, the guest list had swollen beyond Morrison Marketing's expectations. Everyone wanted to see what Aaron Miller was going to do next. I arrived fashionably late, wearing a tuxedo that had cost more than my old monthly salary, and carrying myself with the confidence of a man who'd already won the war. The venue was one of those hotel ballrooms that tried too hard to look elegant, filled with people who were trying equally hard to pretend Morrison Marketing wasn't circling the drain. Lily saw me the moment I walked in. She was standing near the registration table, wearing a black dress that probably represented a month's worth of her reduced salary, playing the role of gracious hostess while her world crumbled around her. For just a moment, our eyes met across the room, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her face. Fear. She was finally beginning to understand that the quiet mechanic she'd married was gone forever, replaced by someone who played the game at a level she couldn't comprehend. I worked the room methodically, renewing old contacts and making new ones, accepting congratulations on Peterson Dynamics' recent successes and fielding questions about future projects. Everyone wanted to talk to Aaron Miller, the man who'd transformed professional disaster into personal triumph. Meanwhile, Lily watched from across the room like a condemned prisoner watching the clock tick toward execution time. The evening's program included the usual speeches and awards, but I'd arranged for a special edition. As a major client, Peterson Dynamics had been invited to make a presentation about the future of aerospace marketing. I'd volunteered to give the speech myself. When my name was announced, the room fell silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Aaron Miller, taking the stage at his cheating wife's company event, with a captive audience of industry professionals who knew the whole sordid story. I walked to the podium with the measured pace of a man who had all the time in the world and nothing to lose. Behind me, on the large screen used for presentations, was the Peterson Dynamics logo and the title of my talk, Trust, Integrity, and Professional Partnerships. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I want to talk about something that's fundamental to our industry, the importance of trust in professional relationships. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a graph of Peterson Dynamics' growth over the past year. When Peterson Dynamics was looking for marketing partners, we had many options. But we chose Morrison Marketing because we believed in their commitment to integrity and professional excellence. Another click, another slide. This one showed a timeline of our partnership, with key milestones highlighted. However, we quickly learned that not all partnerships are built on the same foundation. Some are based on mutual respect and shared values. Others are based on different priorities. The room was silent. Everyone could sense the undercurrents, the careful words that carried meanings beyond their surface. For example, we discovered that some team members were more interested in personal advancement than client service. They were willing to compromise professional relationships for personal gain, to prioritize their own desires over their clients' needs. I clicked again. The new slide showed email headers, not the content, which would have been unethical to share, but just the timestamps and subject lines of messages sent during business hours. Can't wait for tonight. Hotel confirmation. This will be our secret. Lily's face went white. She recognized those headers, knew exactly what emails they represented. We believe that personal integrity and professional integrity are inseparable. A person who will betray their spouse will eventually betray their clients. A person who will lie to their family will lie to their business partners. The audience was hanging on every word, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented, a public execution carried out with PowerPoint slides and corporate speak. That's why Peterson Dynamics made the difficult decision to restructure our partnership with Morrison Marketing. We removed team members who represented integrity risks and focused our collaboration on individuals who shared our values. I clicked to the final slide, which showed Peterson Dynamics' logo alongside the words integrity, excellence, trust. In closing, I'd like to thank Morrison Marketing's leadership for their willingness to make the hard choices necessary to maintain professional standards. Sometimes the most important business decision you can make is knowing when to cut your losses and move forward. I looked directly at Lily for the first time since taking the stage. After all, life is too short to waste on relationships that aren't built to last. Thank you. The applause was thunderous, but it wasn't for Morrison Marketing. It was for Aaron Miller, the man who just delivered the most devastating corporate presentation in industry history. I'd managed to publicly destroy my wife's reputation, confirm every rumor about her affair, and position myself as the victim who'd risen above his circumstances, all while maintaining perfect professional decorum. As I left the stage, I could see Lily pushing through the crowd toward the exit, her face streaked with tears and mascara. The humiliation was complete, total, and utterly public. By tomorrow morning, every aerospace professional in the region would know exactly what had happened and why. But I wasn't finished yet. The final act took place in the hotel parking lot, where I found Brian waiting by my car. He looked like hell, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing a suit that had seen better days. Desperation had transformed him from a confident predator into something pathetic and dangerous. "You son of a bitch," he said as I approached. "You destroyed everything." "I didn't destroy anything," I replied calmly, pulling out my car keys. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. She loved me, you know. We were happy before you came back and ruined everything. She loved the idea of you, the excitement, the secrecy, the fantasy of a different life. But love? Real love requires sacrifice, commitment, the willingness to build something together instead of just taking what you want." Brian's hands clenched into fists. "You think you're so smart, don't you? So much better than everyone else? I think I'm a man who learned from his mistakes. You should try it sometime." That's when he swung at me. I'd been expecting it for months, the moment when Brian's desperation would overcome his judgment, and he'd try to solve his problems with violence. I'd even prepared for it, spending part of my transformation year learning the kind of practical self-defense that actually worked in real situations. Brian's punch was telegraphed and sloppy, thrown by a man who'd spent more time posing in gym mirrors than learning how to fight. I sidestepped easily, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to send him face first into the side of my car. He bounced off the metal and staggered backward, red liquid streaming from his nose, looking shocked that his attempt at intimidation had backfired so spectacularly. "Feel better?" I asked, pulling out my phone to check for damage to my car's paint job. Brian wiped his face with the back of his hand. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the parking lot, bleeding and broken, and finally understanding that he'd lost a war he'd never even realized he was fighting. The next morning brought the final confirmation of my victory. Morrison Marketing, already struggling financially, couldn't survive the scandal of their client appreciation gala becoming a public humiliation of their own employees. Within a week, they'd lost their 3 remaining major clients and were forced to file for bankruptcy. Lily and Brian, the architects of their own destruction, found themselves unemployed in an industry where everyone knew their story. Their affair, which had once seemed like a romantic adventure, had become a cautionary tale about the consequences of betraying trust. But the most satisfying part wasn't their professional destruction. It was the personal cost. Without the excitement of secrecy and forbidden romance, their relationship had nothing to sustain it. They broke up 2 weeks after the gala, each blaming the other for the disaster that had consumed their lives. Lily tried to contact me one last time, leaving voicemails that progressed from anger to bargaining to desperate pleading. But Aaron Miller, the man who'd once loved her enough to plan dream vacations and endure her betrayals, was gone. In his place was someone harder, smarter, and completely immune to her manipulations. I never called her back. 6 months later, I heard through the industry grapevine that Lily had moved to another city, taking a job with a small marketing firm that paid a fraction of her former salary. Brian had left the industry entirely, last seen working at a car dealership in a suburb where no one knew his story. They'd gotten exactly what they'd wanted: freedom from their commitments, the chance to start over, the opportunity to build new lives without the constraints of their old relationships. They just hadn't expected the price to be everything they'd worked to build. As for me, I thrived. Peterson Dynamics continued to grow. My reputation in the industry reached new heights, and I discovered that success was sweeter when you'd earned it by overcoming betrayal rather than simply inheriting it through luck. I never remarried, not because I was bitter or broken, but because I'd learned something valuable about myself during my year in the wilderness. I was complete as I was, successful on my own terms, and immune to the kind of manipulation that had once nearly destroyed me. The ghost had become flesh again, but it was flesh that had been tempered by fire and hardened by experience. Aaron Miller version 2.0 was everything his predecessor had been, plus everything his predecessor had learned through pain. And that, I realized as I sat in my corner office overlooking the city where my old life had died and my new life had been born, was the most perfect revenge of all. Not destruction for its own sake, but transformation, becoming so much more than what I'd been that the people who'd tried to diminish me were left wondering how they'd ever thought I was small enough to destroy. The ticket to oblivion they'd tried to give me had become my boarding pass to a better life,